Welcome to ISTAT's second Aviation Insights program, sponsored by PwC. Today I'm joined by Firoz Tarapore, CEO of DAE. Firoz, it's been a whirlwind 6 months for you by taking over AWAS and creating this new venture. Can you explain to us and to our audience why AWAS and why now?
Okay, well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for inviting us. This was a pretty simple decision for us. We are 10 years old. We had grown to about $5 billion. And as we looked at what we had to do to get where we needed to get to, we had two choices. One is to either look at doing it ourselves, organically, with the investment in systems and processes and all of the other things that you would have to do whilst not being scale, or look at something that would get us to that outcome in a quick kind of way. So since we sold Standard Aero in 2015 and we had that excess capital to deploy, we were looking at opportunities in which to deploy that. And so we looked at just about everything that came out between the end of 2015 and when we did the transaction. And we looked at a couple. We passed because some were too big, some were too far. But when AWAS came out, we knew that this was a perfect fit from just about any standpoint: size, people, systems, processes. And as we went more and more into it, into the due diligence process, I think our conviction level grew to such an extent that we put all of our resources to make sure that we acquired this particular asset. Because what this does for us now is effectively fast forwards 5, 10, maybe even more years of our development. So all of a sudden, we've gone from where we were to a company with 400 assets, $14 billion, and an incredibly strong platform that had been nurtured over the years, investment in systems, processes, et cetera, that now allows us to compete at a completely different level. So from a strategic perspective, this was an absolute no-brainer for us. And the more we looked at this particular company, the more we found that there was a great fit with the people, how they approached their day, how we went to market. And we felt that bringing these two companies together would have actually very little execution risk relative to some of the other things that we had seen, or even just the number of years that we would have to spend. And you've seen the reaction from the market. There's an incredible amount of validation in what we've done. The dialogue that we have now with our clients, with our OEMs, with our providers, whether that's Liquidity or other providers, is just totally different. And this was a home run from a strategic perspective for us.
So the textbooks would say that when you put a merger or an acquisition together of something of this scale, that bringing in the cultures would be of paramount importance. How did you go about merging the culture that is DAE into what is the culture of AWAS?
Well, the cultures actually were not that dissimilar. The biggest difference, in my opinion, was that DAE was a 10-year-old company and we had grown very entrepreneurially, and that meant that we had focused more on growth and less on the systems and processes and all of the rest of it. AWAS, as you know, has a 30-year history or 30-plus year history, and in the last few years, they've invested a lot in systems and processes, so it's a much more mature platform than ours. But in terms of how people approach their day, how people take risk, how people underwrite, how people think about the company, care about the company, we found that there was a very high degree of alignment. So as it related to putting those things together, for us it was much less of a challenge than you would anticipate. For example, if two companies were in different types of businesses, or two companies used different types of compensation structures to reward behavior, or two companies were used to different level of entitlements and any of that kind of stuff. So there were much more similarities than there were differences. So when we looked at our task ahead in putting these two things together, we were relatively comfortable that this was going to be an easy process, because we had met the people, we had had discussions with them about approaches, the market, the life. And I think as it has turned out, 11 weeks into it, we found almost no negative surprises. And it's been relatively heartening to see that all of our assumptions during the due diligence are actually being validated as we go through the process.
So you're obviously a number of weeks into the process now of the integration. How is that going in terms of timing and in terms of reaching a conclusion of the integration of the two platforms?
So just a little bit of background. We announced our transaction at the end of April, and we closed our transaction in the middle of August. And in that time frame, with the blessing of both the seller and the management team at AWAS, we were able to, I think, engage almost from day one. And that allowed us a great head start into where ultimately we'll need to be. So before closing, we announced our leadership team for the combined company. We announced the work of our branding exercise that we had done. We announced the integration team that was being led by our new appointed for the whole company COO. And we aligned our commercial team so that on the closing day, for our clients, there was absolute clarity on who's going to cover them and whether there was going to be any change. And they were notified of that literally immediately after closing. We have set 28th of February as the final date by which everything will be loaded on, so that when we press the button that we do today and get one set of information for one side of the company, that same button will produce an information for the consolidated company. And I'm being told that some of our work streams are way ahead of that schedule. So we are, touch wood, doing well relative to where we want to be.
One of the points you touched on earlier was scale, and obviously this gives DAE, in terms of aircraft leasing, much more significant scale. Maybe you could touch upon what scale means in terms of this very competitive business and how you will approach that.
So scale for us, and I think scale in this business, not just for us, is very, very critical, because with scale, you obviously get the right metal price, the right financing options, the right discussion with the clients, the right ability to provide broader solutions to clients, et cetera. And so I think getting to scale was really critical for us. Now, as you know, the definition of scale in our business continues to change almost on a daily basis. So not too long ago, the size of the number 10 player was $2 billion. Today, the size of the number 10 player is 10 plus billion. Today, we have 3 people who have more than $20 billion of assets. And if you roll forward all of the orders that we see already on a committed basis, in the not so distant future, there will be 6 people, maybe 7 people who will be at the $20 plus billion level. And I think that scale actually means something in their ability to earn above average margins over time, because they bring all of those benefits of metal, pricing, liquidity, all that together. So to us, getting there was really important. Now we're at 14. We're the only ones in the top tier now who do not have an order book, because AWAS, because it was in sale mode, never placed one. DAE didn't have the scale to get the right price on the metal. But now we have both of those things. Now we have the ability to do something that can be of scale and can give us all of the things that we otherwise want in that order book. So we're going to get there. Now, having said that, this is not kind of a linear path up to the sky, because at some point I would argue that certain diseconomies of scale will come into play. And you can see some anecdotal evidence of that coming through if you look at the sheer number of planes that people have ordered and what that means for lease rates in today's market. You'll see that at 40, 45 billion, for example, that potentially there are subpar activities that you would engage in. I've ordered so many planes, I've got to now place them. And that in general, I think, takes away. So we're not sure what the right scale is, but we definitely know that it's kind of where we are, slightly above that, but maybe not at 2x or 3x kind of where we are. And it's unclear whether it'll work out that way or not work out that way. Only time will tell. Others have expressed an ambition to go up to 60 billion. We will see how that ambition works out. We will see how that experiment works out. But we would argue that at some point, it becomes not so obvious that 60 is better than 40.
You've gone on record to say that you would look at speculative orders. Could you opine on that a bit further, please, in terms of timing, scale, and aircraft type?
Right. So, as I said before, we're the only ones in the top tier who do not have an order with the OEMs, and that's for historical reasons. But going forward, that's not tenable for our combined company and the size that we want to be. So it's clear, at least in our minds, that we need to have a secured pipeline order. Now, in terms of the quantum, we look at a planning horizon of about 8 years. And in that, we think that the number of aircraft that we need from the OEM channel is somewhere between 170 and 250 aircraft. Now, all else being equal, we'll probably split it between the two, but the world is not all else being equal, so who knows where that's going to end up. And we've also said publicly that whilst we like wide-body exposure of certain kinds, and we can talk more about that from a speculative position, speculative order position, we'll probably focus on the narrow-body side of the aircraft, as crowded as that is, because ultimately that's the bread and butter of our industry, and we'll do that.
So speaking about the crowds around the narrow-body segment at the moment, we've obviously seen a lot of that. We've seen some significant depression in lease rates on newer aircraft as well. Does that concern you if you're about to make a speculative order?
Yes. So I think that there is a significant disconnect today between the lease rates that are available for both the new technology narrow-body products, being both from Boeing and Airbus, and the prices at which you can place an order today with the OEMs for positions that deliver multiple years into the future, or even a few years into the future with escalation, etc. So we think that it is very, very hard today for any lessor or any acquirer to make an investment case to their boards that say that, okay, pay that price for this sort of expected return. So something has to change. It's unclear, at least to us, what that something is, whether it's the lease rates that's going to change or whether it's the pricing dynamic.
So the sale and leaseback market is obviously the other avenue in terms of volume. Do you see DAE as being a significant player in that market going forward?
For us, there are two SLB markets. One is the transactional SLB market, which is completely insane at the moment. And the other one is the relationship SLB market, where real clients need real solutions that are not always driven from a pipeline product. And we have invested very heavily in our credit function so that we can take risk across different jurisdictions, across different credit types, across different asset types. And we believe that the value that we can add through those transactions will steer us towards those sorts of SLBs and those sorts of PLB transactions. And we're very happy to do that. We've done transactions where I think most lessors would not, all the way from Papua New Guinea to Libya to Egypt. And I think the returns on that are very commensurate with the risks that you end up taking. So we have those capability sets. They've been honed over a number of years. We're going to invest in those capability sets with the hope of out-earning returns that you would get just on a transactional SLB basis. That market is competitive for reasons that are just difficult.
So you mentioned earlier on about fleet management and say your wide-body exposure. You also have got a legacy turboprop exposure, which has kind of come into this transaction. How do you see your wide-body and turboprop exposure being managed through your fleet management process over the coming years?
We placed an order for the ATR 72-600, which, by the way, is our only non-jet asset. So we don't do anything else. We don't do Embraer, we don't do Bombardier, we don't do any of the other OEMs that are out there, or any of the other types, even within ATR. And that's because that asset is a unique asset, and we actually love all the characteristics of that asset. Now, when we placed an order, I said, this was in February of 2014, that we would be delighted to own somewhere between 60 and 100. And we're up to just about 60. And I think the path to get from 0 to 60 was relatively easy because a couple of big players decided to exit. ALC exited, GCAS exited, and we benefited partially from that. So we're now the second largest lessor of the ATR 72-600. And if we can find a way to get from the just under 60 to 100, we would be delighted to find a way, because the assets that we own today are roughly $1 billion. So and it behaves like a cohort. So it's $1 billion cohort, earns better than narrow-body assets, for example, in terms of returns. And is that such a bad thing to have $1 billion out of 14 that displays characteristics that we like, has returns that we like, but is limited in terms of where it can go. I mean, if we can take it from $1 billion to $2 billion, we'd love to do that, but I think the path to that is doing much harder. Now, if it turns out that we take our $14 billion company and make it a $20 billion company or something else, I think we will have to revisit whether 1 out of 20 still makes sense. But as long as the returns are there and it behaves in a similar kind of way, we would argue that it plays a very big role.
And in terms of your wide-body exposure, what's the plans for that?
So in terms of wide-body exposure, we have exposure to the 777 freighter. So we underwrote Emirates' Sky Cargo transaction when they did it between 2009 and 2015. We own 12 of those now. Frankly, if we could find 12 more at the right price, we would add that to our portfolio because it's a fabulous asset. Again, from a lessor perspective, it ticks just about every box that is out there. And then in addition to that, we're underwriting capital to 7879, 350-900, and then everything else on a kind of selected basis. We don't do 4-engine aircraft, so we're not doing the 4-engine products by either Airbus or OEM. But other than that, we will selectively underwrite the transactions where it makes a difference to our client, and it also ticks all of our boxes from a return perspective. It is, in our part of the world, long-haul aircraft are part and parcel of the fleet strategy. And as we embed ourselves in our clients and provide them solutions, that is a very critical part of what we do. And that's why we get the seat at the table that we do, because we have the capital commitment to take on that exposure and do it in a way that we think will make sense.
Unlike other lessors, you have a sovereign parent in ICD. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for you going forward in terms of strategy?
So that actually makes a big difference from our perspective. So just to level set, ICD is the investment corporation of Dubai, and it's the main investment arm of the government of Dubai. It has investments in different sectors, mostly infrastructure sectors around banks and real estate, retail, hospitality, etc., and of course transportation. It owns Emirates, it owns other things, including a 95% stake in DAE. So ICD was a founding shareholder of DAE, and their support to us has been absolutely instrumental in where we've taken the company from where we started, the redirection that we had to do in 2008 and 2009, and where we are today, including the most recent transaction, that's AWAS. Now, if you think about the other aviation assets that ICD has invested in, these are assets that they've built and nurtured and supported over a very, very long period of time. So Emirates today is 32 years old. Some of their other assets are even longer in terms of their corporate lives. If you look at Dubai Duty Free, Danata, et cetera, et cetera. And as you think about DAE's corporate life, so we're today roughly year 10, and with the support that we have of the principal investment arm, we are thinking about life as it relates to kind of year 25 and beyond, not whether somebody wants to sell us in 3 years or 4 years or 7 years or something along that line. And for us, the peace of mind that that brings to us in terms of our planning, in terms of how we can think about what's right for the long term for our company, that I think sets us apart in that we don't have to worry about all of the short-term distractions that can come along from planning in a business that otherwise is a very, very long cycle business. Being part of ICD, having a broader mandate, makes an enormous difference in, again, how we talk to our clients, the seat that we have at the table, and ultimately the things that we can get done.
Most businesses, the CEO will sit where his or her cohorts are, or closest cohorts are sitting as well. But in this instance, you've got a centre in Dubai as traditional DAE headquarters. You've got a centre in Dublin, which is a traditional AWAS headquarters. Does that prove any difficulty for you going forward?
So just to level set, we go to market from 6 locations. We're in Singapore, Dubai, Dublin, and 3 locations in the US. And from a management team perspective, of the 10 people that report to me, 5 of them sit in Dubai, 4 of them sit in Dublin, here where we're taping, and 1 of them sit in New York. And that for us is intentional because we want to make sure that every part of our organization feels like they're connected to the body. Now, having that dispersed leadership team has its costs as well, because it would be far easier, of course, to walk down the hallway, make decisions, etc. But having that dispersion has benefits as well, particularly because our largest employee base is here in Dublin. So 80 out of our 140 professionals on the leasing side are based here, and having that connection is very, very important to us. In fact, we have an internal mandate that every one of us, including me, who has an office in either Dubai or Dublin, has to have management visibility into the office that is not their normal office, because this allows people to feel connected to what we do, have an opportunity to talk to people. So I end up spending a lot of time here. I have an office downstairs, and all of the people who are based in Dubai have an office here. People who are based in Dublin have an office in Dubai. So I think we are making it work, and it's a model that is different, and I think it's a model that we acknowledge has some issues and costs associated with it, but we think that overall, frankly, it's something that will work really well for the company that we are.
In terms of looking forward from the industry point of view, what do you see as the greatest challenges for the industry over the coming years, and ultimately the greatest challenges and potentially opportunities for DA?
There are two things that are also manifesting itself. Now, people say, okay, it's anecdotal, but we don't know whether it's structural. And those two things are that a lot of the new capital, the new liquidity that came into this marketplace, came in with return expectations that were totally different than the return expectations that traditional players had enjoyed in that business. They came in with return expectations that were calibrated more to what their choices were back in their home markets or back in whatever other things that they were investing in. And the liquidity that tagged on along with that also came in, at rates that are totally different than what the industry had traditionally kind of funded itself with. So if you put those two things together, I think the question we all have to ask is this a paradigm shift towards lower returns? Or is this, as some people say, oh, don't worry, it'll go away when the first shock comes around? And I think that for us is a legitimate question. And in many ways, the stronger players, us included, in some ways, I think have to hope for some sort of shock to happen so that we can see what the real capacity is in the marketplace and then make commitments around that capacity. Now, whether that will happen anytime soon is, anybody's guess. It's unlikely, but liquidity shocks have a way of coming around when nobody expects them, so we'll see what happens. I think on the other side, we talked about this a minute ago, the level of lease rates today is a challenge, particularly to people who invested their capital when fuel prices were X, escalation was Y, and they're struggling to make money. It's a challenge for people like us who want to put more money to work in this particular business, but we're struggling to justify the investment case for doing that. So I think as we think, and of course there's, the more mundane challenges around production rates, etc. But in terms of fundamentally thinking about where this industry is structured and where this industry is headed, I think we have to kind of solve some of these things before we have a good sense of what's next for each one of us. And of course, the bigger you are, the more protection you have relative to some things not working out to expectations. And that's where also I think scale will make a big difference.
Thank you, Firoz, for joining us today. Wish you all the success with the integrations going forward. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.